Jeff's introduction and the introduction this morning depict me somewhat as Dr. Doom, and in a way that's true. When I began studying economics 50 years ago, I was told that ultimately the debts can't be paid, and I was told to begin studying the history of debt and the history of money. And essentially, the bridge from this morning to what I'm going to talk about is almost all money for the last 5,000 years has been to pay debts or to denominate the debts in which you had to pay by commodities. In Japan, I think as was indicated earlier, the debts were denominated in silver, but they had to be paid in rice. The introduction of silver coinage was a disaster for Japan because all of a sudden the people, the producers on the land, had to pay more in rice and in what they produced. An even greater disaster was the introduction of gold. And one of the first books that I bought 50 years ago was a green volume published in Japan called The Introduction of Gold in Japan, where all of a sudden people had to pay even more rice to settle the debts. My own field of specialty at our group that works out of Harvard University, the International Scholars Committee on the Ancient Near East, is to study the origins of money and the origins of coinage and credit and debt in Sumer, Babylonia, Egypt, and the other ancient Near Eastern countries. If you look at the royal announcements, every new king coming to the throne for 2,000 years in Mesopotamia would start the first full year of his reign, the second year, by annulling the agrarian debts and starting with a clean slate. The Babylonian debt cancellations from Hammurabi's dynasty onwards had three portions. One, they would annul the barley debts, not the business debts that were in silver, but the barley debts owed by the community, the unpaid taxes mainly that had built up, and unpaid obligations owed to the royal collectors. They would free the debt bond, whoever had been pledged to the creditor as bond persons, whether it was the daughter or the son or the wife, but more usually the slave. The slave was returned to the original families, and the land and the crop rights that had been pledged to the creditor were given away. Those of you who've read the Bible may recognize these three items from the Jubilee law of Leviticus 25. And in fact, the Hebrew word for the debt forgiveness, duror, is a cognate to the Babylonian andurarum. The important thing to realize when you're talking about money or talking about coinage is, what was it for? It was to pay debts. And all of the kings, not only in Babylonia, but in other regions from 2000 on, the first thing that they would do upon taking the throne was to announce the price list, that 1 liter of barley was equal to 1 shekel of silver. The same rule applies in Hammurabi's laws, and the idea is that while the debts were denominated in silver, obviously the people in the land, the economy as a whole, didn't have a silver mine on the land. All they could produce were the crops. And they listed wool, copper, other things, and to be paid. So the idea, if you look at the debt contracts, 99% of the documents that we have on cuneiform written in clay were economic documents. They were largely marriage documents, legal documents, business documents. Most of the business records were kept by merchants who worked out of the temples or out of the palace bureaucracy, which is why where the money was. And they all concerned debts. The key thing in understanding money is forget gold, forget silver, they're fiat money. all throughout history, the value of gold and silver has been set by the state. And what gives value to the coinage is not that they are in gold, not that they are in silver, not that they were in copper, but that the state says you have to pay your taxes in this particular currency, and it was taxation that gives value to the coinage. In 1904, the German monetary historian Georg Friedrich Knapp called this the state theory of money. And in the 1910s, a British banker in New York, Innes, wrote a whole sort of history of money from the point of view of treating it as the theory of money. My colleague and boss at Kansas City, Randall Ray, has edited a volume on the writings of Innes that's published by Edward Elgar, who publishes most of our Kansas City things. And so we're known at Kansas City for what's called modern monetary theory, that the government can create money. We have criticized the euro from the very beginning because the euro and the European community is crippled by not having a central bank that does what a central bank is supposed to do, which is to print money. That's why the Bank of England was created in 1694. It's why the Federal Reserve was created in the United States in 1913. This explains why today the Federal Reserve supplies money to the banking system at 1/4%, and why England has to pay 2%, and why Italy has to pay 9% as of yesterday, and why Greece has to pay 30%. They don't have a central bank. There is an idea in Europe that creating, if you let a central bank create money, that's going to be unstable and be inflationary. I don't know how many of you come from the psychological discipline, but the idea, psychologists have the idea of an implanted memory. A lot of this has to do with trials about child molestation. The idea is that many psychologists are so eager to prove rape or molestation that they sort of lead the patient until the patient believes that there's been a trauma in the background. There's this kind of implanted memory throughout Europe in the central bankers. If you're a central banker, you have to be brainwashed to believe that you've been raped and your country has been raped by central banks creating money. And this implanted memory is subsidized by the banking system to convince the Europeans that governments should not create money. They should depend entirely on the bank. So in the European Constitution and in the German Constitution, the central bank is illegal to lend money to government, so that it has to depend entirely on the private sector to finance the deficits, meaning the private banks. Why would the banks have such a nonsensical theory? Well, they wanted the governments dependent upon the private banks to create the credit for the government that the government could have created on its own keyboard. Today, money really is not silver or gold, it's electronic. When Japan runs a balance of payments surplus today, what does it do? It doesn't keep its international reserves in gold anymore. It keeps them in the forms of loans to the U.S. Treasury, just as China has $2 trillion worth of the loans to the Treasury. This is what has led to the BRIC countries, Brazil, India, Russia, and China, now joined by Pakistan and Iran, to have an alternative to the monetary system where if Japan or China or other countries run a balance of payment surplus, they lend the money to the U.S. Treasury to pay for the military expansion abroad, ringing them with military bases. So essentially, their saving takes the form of financing a military engine to enforce their compulsion and extort extract the economic surplus. America gets a free ride in this because the American currency, the debt, mainly is held by foreigners in the form of loans because when China tried to use its dollars to actually buy filling stations and oil refineries, the Americans said, no, that's a national interest, you can't buy it. In the 1980s, the Americans told the Japanese, well, you can't, why don't you use your money to buy real estate? So the Japanese spent $1 billion on Rockefeller Center. Within 1 year, they were wiped out totally because Rockefeller Center didn't make a profit. The Rockefellers had been trying to unload the Rockefeller Center for 30 years, and finally they were able to sell not only Rockefeller Center, but whole tracts of downtown Los Angeles to the Japanese, who belatedly found out there isn't any downtown Los Angeles. I mean, it's all just flat. So not only is money debt, but the debt internationally is almost always a kind of a free lunch. That's what my book Superimperialism was about. And although the introduction depicted me as Dr. Doom in this, by looking at the fact that money is debt and the debts ultimately can't be paid, in 1990 I worked with Scudder, Stevens and Clark, a brokerage house, came to me, and money manager came to me and wanted me. They said, well, I've been warning that third world debts couldn't be paid and Latin American debts couldn't be paid. Would I head up a investment fund on investing in third world debt? Because if I was in it, Dr. Doom of the 1970s, then people would believe that the debt, was valid. In 1990, Argentina and Brazil were paying 45% interest annually in dollars on their dollar debt. Mexico was paying 22.5% on its mesobonos, its international debt. So I said, okay, we'll set up the fund. I don't know how long this can go, but let's make it a 5-year closed-end fund. We tried to sell it in America. No American would buy Latin American debt. They said, look, we've just been wiped out by the write-downs for the Brady bonds. We've lost our money in Latin America. We won't do it. We went to Europe. The Europeans said, no, we've lost our shirts, enough on Latin America. This has been going on for 200 years. Every loan we've made to the third world, we've lost money, won't do it. Our underwriter, Merrill Lynch, went to Buenos Aires and Argentina and Brazil, and was able to sell $75 million worth of our fund to the central bankers, the president of the country, and the oligarchy who runs Latin America. It was an offshore fund, so I wasn't able to buy it. The fund became the second highest performing fund in the world in 1990, showing that optimism pays sometimes if you know what to do. And we realized that as long as the central bankers and the richest families were buying into the fund, that they were going to pay the debts because they were paying to themselves. And for a Latin American, the Yankee imperialist was their own oligarchy working, lending money dollars out of their own offshore accounts, in this case the Dutch West Indies. So this was very interesting. The fund was folded. It made a lot of money.